Well, in terms of economic growth, obviously it's positive. The economy has grown to 1.77 billion. That is a significant growth in the economy, and I have congratulated the government in relation to that, despite the fact that obviously the caveat is that a lot of that economic growth is government projects, construction projects funded by debt, and that remains a concern for us. I mean, our concern mainly in relation to the figures, and this has been a very difficult budget speech for me, because on the one hand, I don't want to create uncertainty in Gibraltar, but on the other, I've got a duty to the people of Gibraltar to give an accurate reflection of what I think are the state of public finances. The main concern for us is the significant levels of government spending over the last 4 years, both in terms of capital projects. They've spent £750 million over the last 4 years, and also significant increases in recurrent expenditure. That's the cost annually of running the government. And when you actually look at recurrent expenditure, which has increased very substantially during the last 4 years, and you compare, for example, growth during the same period of revenue is rising at a lower rate than your expenditure. So there is a gradual convergence of recurrent expenditure with recurrent revenue. And of course, I've also said that you cannot debate these estimates of revenue expenditure in a vacuum without taking into account the elephant in the room, which is £400 million in Credit Finance Company Limited, which is being used to fund the commuter pensions of civil servants and the government-owned companies.
So you maintain that the picture of public finances presented in Parliament today by the Chief Minister is not actually a fair representation of what they are?
Yes. The trend all over Europe post-Greece has been for greater transparency of our public finances. In the United Kingdom, the debts of government-owned companies are taking into account in calculating the national debt. And that's been our position, it was our position during the general election. But let me put it in very simple terms to people. When the Chief Minister says, we've made a surplus of 38.8 million, so you spent 38.8 million less than you have in income. Okay, in very simple terms. But what he's not taking into account is the fact that 400 million in credit finance from the Gibraltar Savings Bank is being used for expenditure that's been traditionally the expenditure of the government. So the commuter pensions of civil servants, the expenditure of government-owned companies to the tune of hundreds of millions of pounds. So you see, if you were to take that picture into account,
what would it
then
be
of course,
do you think?
Well, I wouldn't be able to give you an exact picture because we don't know how much of that 300 million in Gibraltar Investment Holdings has actually been spent, but certainly it would wipe out the surplus. I have absolutely no doubt about that. And my argument is, well, you can't debate the public finances, you can't debate the size of the surplus whilst you have this company, Credit Finance, being used in order to fund government expenditure. But quite clearly, it just simply reduces the expenditure of government in these books, allowing the government to declare a higher surplus. Today, the Chief Minister has made an announcement effectively mortgaging 6 or 7 estates, government housing, so that it can borrow £300 million. So the public debt is actually going to be increasing from the positions that we have today. And I've got to be honest with the people of Gibraltar, which is that in the uncertain world that we live in, I don't believe that the levels of spending that we've seen over the last 4 years is actually prudent.
But borrowing in order to then invest and make good on that investment is normal economic activity, isn't it? I mean, it's debt, but with a view to it becoming an investment.
Yes, but you see, what the government has been doing over the last 4 years is not borrowing within the legal borrowing limits. It's actually been using credit finance in order to borrow more than what the law allowed them to borrow. And of course, it's all relative. Borrowing has got to be repaid at some stage. If you continuously increase your recurrent expenditure, and you increase your recurrent expenditure at a rate that is higher than the revenue that is the revenue increase year on year, at some stage it's going to converge. And
you said government is spending too much. What do you think it should cut?
Well, look, the government has got to be carefully prioritised. I mean, I know that what he is going to say is Mr. Feetham stands for austerity and I do not. But look, he cannot run with the hares and hunt with the hounds. He cannot come to this house, as he did in making statements to the Chronicle this morning, saying that he was going to be reining in government spending and he's got to be cautious in the light of Brexit. and then make no announcements about where the government is going to be cutting in terms of future spending.
Where should he cut?
Well, I certainly do not believe that it is realistic for the government to say, as the Chief Minister has said, that it's going to be meeting its manifesto commitments. That's hundreds of millions of pounds. What we need to be doing is taking a step back, completing, for example, Laguna, completing Moorish Castle, completing Glacis, and completing other priority projects. But in terms of future spending, we really need to take a pause, we need to be reflecting and looking to see whether that is realistic in the light of the challenges that Gibraltar is facing. I don't believe that that is actually unreasonable. It's not austerity by any measure. What we need to be doing is to be cautious and to see how things go over the next year or so. I want Gibraltar's economic model to survive. I want us to be able to open new areas of business for Gibraltar. And it may well be that we can do that, and we're all going to be working very hard in order to do that. But it may not work out, and therefore in those circumstances I think that we should not be talking about fulfilling manifesto commitments in the hundreds of millions of pounds at this stage.